Welcome to another Counselor Soapbox video. This episode, Drug Counseling number 9, discusses counseling skills that the beginning counselor needs to develop. The primary tool the counselor uses is themselves as a person. There have been a number of core conditions identified which seem to make all the difference in how the counseling relationship progresses. One is unconditional positive regard. The counselor needs to feel good about the client as a person, not necessarily the things they have done. Respect is an important core condition. Each client should be treated with respect. Other conditions are warmth, concreteness, empathy, and genuineness. What's the best counseling theory to use in substance abuse counseling? A lot of theories have been developed, but no one theory has been proven best. It's mostly about the relationship between the client and the counselor. Client-centered is a basic skill, and the most useful tools may be motivational interviewing, stages of change, cognitive behavioral therapy, solution-focused, and narrative therapy. No matter which theory a counselor uses, they're likely to borrow tools or exercises from some of the other therapies. Some important brief therapy methods that are useful. One is teaching the client coping skills and helping them to develop those skills. The counselor needs to be able to define what coping skills are. They also need to address the issue of cravings for drugs and alcohol use. Managing unhelpful thoughts, problem solving, refusal skills, and planning for emergencies are all important aspects. There's a CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy format, in which the counselor and client follow a set routine. That routine is usually to set an agenda at the beginning of the session. What's the important things to deal with in this particular counseling session? Check on the client's mood. Bridge from the last session. If a counselor gives homework, then they should attend to that homework. If things are getting in the way of the client working on homework or other requirements, such as attending meetings or coming to individual sessions, those therapy interfering behaviors are important to discuss. Then the counselor and the client work today's agenda. At the end, there may be a brief summary, assigning additional homework, and the use of feedback for the session. All of this CBT format is based on the idea that this would be done in an individual session. Group session formats would be different. Feelings work is important in drug and alcohol counseling. Feelings are a common trigger for relapse. Feelings work can be done either in a group setting or in individual sessions. But there's a basic process. First is to recognize what you are feeling. Many people have been so focused on trying to avoid feelings and think logically that they fail to recognize when they are getting frustrated or agitated. So a beginning step is to say, where in your body are you feeling that feeling? Visualize that feeling as part of your body. Once you have that visualization of what's happening in the body, try to find a name that fits that feeling. Learning the names of a wide variety of feelings and what they are can be an important part of feelings work. Once you have recognized you're feeling a certain feeling, you have a name for that feeling, now you can decide what you want to do with the feeling. You don't need feelings to control you, but they are important sources of information. We also need to work on the self-esteem problem. Many of our clients come to treatments saying they have low self-esteem. Another issue is that they say they're trying to find themselves or get to know themselves. and learning to like yourself. Liking yourself does not mean you're conceited or think you're important. But if you don't like yourself, you make it very hard for other people around you to like you. Counselors need to develop nonverbal skills. A lot of information is conveyed between people by nonverbals. One is eye contact. The other is relaxed body posture, use of gestures, using an animated tone, and being reassuring and encouraging with your vocalizations. All of these can help make it easier for the client to relax and feel comfortable sharing about their personal behaviors and feelings. Counselors need to learn how to teach the client the counseling process, sometimes called socializing them to counseling. Clients often come to counseling or programs feeling very nervous and anxious. They may not know what to expect. So by socializing them to the client role, you teach them what they are expected to do. That counseling is not something that the counselor does to the client, and that in drug counseling you're not going to give them a magic pill to cure their problems. There needs to be an open discussion of the problems. They do not need to try to be okay. It's perfectly okay for them to have cravings or feelings that are negative. This counseling process is not an interrogation and should not be criticism of them as a person. Clients have frequently had lots of criticism and attack, and it hasn't been useful. You also need to be able to explain treatment planning, how you develop a plan for the changes the client is going to want to make in their lives. It's important to note that the counselor does not have all the answers. The client is the expert on themselves. Some clients are able to do certain things and not others. Self-exploration is always encouraged, and it's important to explain confidentiality and any legal exceptions. It's important for the counselor to develop listening skills. There are a group of skills that we call active listening skills. Part of that is the ability to reflect feelings that the client is saying, also to reflect the meaning behind what they're saying. The counselor may seek to simplify a long story the client has told them, or to summarize the meaning behind the things that are happening in the client's life. Part of this is attending, making sure that the client feels that you're genuinely interested in hearing their story. In what they say, the counselor is looking for and helping the client find hope. Without hope, it's not likely they'll make much progress. You're also looking for positive asset search. What are the skills and abilities that the client might be able to draw on to improve their life? Often, what the counselor is doing is helping them reframe or restory, create a new story. This is sometimes called a new pair of glasses. Any time that the client says, "I never thought of it that way," there's an opportunity for new learning and interpretation to be taking place. So, part of the counseling process is to help clients find a new way of looking at things. Leading skills are important. Many clients feel lost and don't know what they need to do or how to do it. Some of the leading skills the counselor needs are the ability to clarify, to suggest connections between things that the client has experienced and their behaviors. There's a fine line between leading and confrontation. The counselor cannot go too fast. If you try to lead, you want to be just a half a step ahead of the client, not several steps. Otherwise, you're dragging them across the parking lot rather than walking hand in hand with your client. The downward arrow technique is often used in cognitive forms of therapy. Often, there are other things lurking behind the immediate emotion. So you ask, what is below that fear? Someone is afraid, if I take that class, I might not get an A. So you ask, why does that matter? Oh, well, it would be awful terrible if I didn't get an A. Well, what's the worst that could happen? And then you explore the possible negative consequences. Well, if that happened, if you didn't get a good grade, then what? And then this technique continues to go down, looking for the absolute fear or emotion that is driving thinking, feeling, and behaving. A common problem that's addressed in counseling is rumination, that tendency to chew on the thing that's eating you. People go over and over and over the same problem, and nothing changes. It's important to realize that rumination is usually about either the past or the future. If you ruminate about the past, you tend to get depressed. If you ruminate about the future, you tend to get anxious. What you want the client to do, and the counselor needs to do with them, is stay in the here and now. Focus on the feelings and try to get the client to use I statements. Not so-and-so makes me angry, but when so-and-so does a certain behavior, I feel angry. By using I statements, they shift the control from other people controlling their thinking, feeling, and behaving to the possibility that they might be able to think, feel, or behave in different ways. Counselors need to work very carefully to develop comfort with self-disclosure. The various professions have different attitudes towards self-disclosure. There are benefits, but there are also disadvantages. The benefits can be when the counselor shares things about themselves. It can reduce shame and guilt on the part of the client. It reduces isolation, and it brings it back to the now. Self-disclosure can increase intimacy and build relationships, and it shares the counselor's reaction to the client. The disadvantages are if the counselor shares too much about themselves, it takes the focus off the client, it devalues the client's experience, and the session can easily become about the counselor. The important thing is to use only limited self-disclosure, only self-disclose the things that might be helpful to the client. Another group of skills that are helpful for a counselor to develop are called influencing skills. Some of these include interpretation, normalizing. Many clients think they are unique and are surprised to find out that everyone else goes through similar experiences. The counselor can also influence by providing context. Often we talk about lifespan issues, that at certain ages and times in your life, it's normal to go through certain experiences and struggle with certain issues. It's also helpful for the client to influence by reframing, looking for other ways to look at the same fact situation. There's a saying in counseling training programs to be careful not to eat the client's soup and then tell them how it tastes. Sometimes growth can come from the process of struggling. So letting the client talk it out and come to conclusions can make those conclusions more meaningful to the client than if the counselor simply provides that answer. Confrontation can be useful, though it has to be done very carefully. Confrontation can involve pointing out discrepancies between the client's statements. One time they say this, but the next time they said something different. You can also point out discrepancies between the statements and the beliefs and behaviors. The client might say they want to stop drinking, but they continue to stop by the bar after work to see their friends. You can also point out discrepancies between strengths and weaknesses, when they are able to cope with certain problems and when they can't. And you point out discrepancies between client statements versus what the counselor is observing. It's important to make confrontation work. You don't want to knock them down and beat them up. The ways to make confrontation work is to stay very concrete, avoid global statements, and to provide hope that if the client tries different ways of thinking or behaving, they are likely to get different results. Disputing unhelpful beliefs is another important counseling skill. Often the client is stuck in believing something which may not be helpful. So ways of disputing that would be, where's the evidence from that? And you're looking for thinking distortions. They believe if they're not perfect, they're wrong. Black and white thinking. I'm either get everything right or I'm no good. And you find a more accurate interpretation of events. Sometimes we do a thing called paradoxical interventions, where the counselor argues for the problem. Now, this needs to be exaggerated and overdone. It needs to be laughable for it to be useful to the client. If the client can see how the way they've been thinking is in fact taking them in exactly the direction they don't want to go, and they can laugh about how silly it is that they're doing that, that can easily change the way they see the situation. Counselors should be looking for change talk. There's an important principle that whatever you pay attention to, you're likely to get more of. So you don't want to attend only to the problems. Ways to look for change talk include, when was that not a problem? What would be better for you if you changed this particular thing? How would you know if this happened? Or how would you know if it was no longer a problem? Was there ever a time? What was it like when there was no problem? And what do you most hope for? Documenting individual therapy. In this video, we've talked largely about individual therapy techniques, though some of these can be applied in group settings. But it's very important that you document individual therapy. There's a thing called a process recording, in which what you want to do is record the process of the way things happen. Typically, the counselor writes progress notes, which can come in a number of formats, but are focused on where is the client at, what interventions do you do, how did the client respond to those interventions, what does this all mean, or assessment, and then what is the plan for future. And there's also a way of documenting that involves a case presentation. Sometimes a counselor will write up a session looking not at the individual details for their client, but the basic principles of what the client was saying and doing, and then take this to a presentation, a group of peers, and say, what would you have done in this case? And this case presentation can really help the beginning counselor learn new skills and other ways of looking at problems. Emotional baggage is an important consideration. Both the counselor and the client may come to sessions with emotional baggage. One type we call transference. This is when the client has unrealistic expectations of the counselor. They may want love and help or protection from the counselor, and they expect the counselor to be the solution of their problems. In transference, the client is treating the counselor just like someone from their past. If they had a bad relationship with a father, they may be antagonistic and confrontational with a male counselor. Countertransference is when the counselor sees things in this client that remind them of past life events. The counselor has to be very careful about dumping their stuff on the client. And it may be hard to set limits and boundaries. The counselor and the client both need to learn to set limits and boundaries. However, those limits and boundaries need to not be punitive or harmful to the client, but helpful in teaching them how to have good, healthy boundaries. Boundary issues between the counselor and the client are always important. Sometimes they're difficult to manage. Touch can mean different things to different people, and counselors need to be very careful not to touch a client in a way that's inappropriate or a way that might trigger them because they were touched that way harmfully in the past. It's very important to avoid getting into any kind of romantic relationship with a client. It can damage the relationship, it can damage both the counselor and the client, and I've seen it end careers. It's also important to have boundaries around money. Once you lend a client money or borrow from them, sell them or something, or buy something from them, it undermines the trust issues needed in a counseling relationship. It's also important to avoid emotional entanglements, getting caught up in their family issues and their day-to-day problems. Counselors need to set and keep limits on what is okay, discussion of problems, and what's not, and that is getting overly involved in the client's day-to-day life. Eventually, counseling needs to end. Occasionally, someone is in long-term treatment, but even that eventually ends. It's important to prepare the client for the process of termination. Many of our clients have trust issues. They felt deserted or abandoned by parents or other caregivers. So it's important for them to understand that the counselor cannot be there for the rest of their lives to solve their problems for them. Counseling is time limited. So in beginning the therapy or treatment, you tell them that we've got this much time and we'll try to get as much done as we can, and then go over whatever the policies would be for contacting the counselor after treatment ends. What's ahead for the Counselor's Soapbox video channel? More in our Learning About Drug Counseling series, more drug education videos, and a series on mental health and wellness. If you've enjoyed this video, please click the like button directly below. For more information, please visit the counselorsoapbox.com blog, where you will find articles on mental health, substance abuse, and having a happy life. The David Joel Miller fiction and nonfiction books are available on Amazon.